intense political oversight rather than fiduciary oversight.
Turn over to Mr. Lawson.
Lots of constraints.
We got you, Adam. We got you.
But again, if there are ones that you feel that you would like to add, then we would welcome that feedback.
Mr. Lawson.
I guess I'm a little bothered by your last question, because I would hope to get from you or from staff or from whomever a better idea than I have now as to why we're picking whomever we're picking. If the goal is to see, I mean, I kind of heard before, we should be looking at our competitors, people to whom we lose personnel, people from whom we try to attract in personnel. That makes sense to me. Because I guess I'm not really sure why we're including some people, some entities, and why we're not including other entities. And I would rather see a more functional approach to the determination of what this comparator group should be. And that's one of the reasons why I asked why it's being used. In the private sector, public companies, the peer group, comparator group is considered very important to the executive, chief executive officers and other people in the C-suite, because the bonuses paid to those other companies are, shareholders look at that to see why did you get this bonus of this size and they got a bonus of that size. So it's very important to figure out what entities you're going to be compared to, because the proxy statement has to show how your bonus compared to the bonuses paid to other people in your comparator group, and it's laid out there. So so this issue is they drill down on this very carefully, sharpen their pencils, and figure out what's going to happen and why and how this is going to impact my pay this year. Not some amorphous kind of, maybe this is going to impact our general pay. I mean, they're very focused on how it's going to be used, and that drives their decision-making in terms of who is and who is not going to be in that peer group. And so without that kind of background, I'm very concerned about throwing somebody, some company in here because they're top five. I want to know why we're picking somebody and why we're not picking somebody, and what impact that might have on our decision making. So I'm actually looking to you for a more focused analysis as to why we would pick one over the other. In first glance, the thought that comes to mind is, who are our competitors for available talent? In the law firm area that I'm most familiar with, we knew who our competitors were for law firm talent. We knew exactly where the talent was. We knew who we got. We knew who and where, and we knew exactly what the other firms were paying. And we either decided to match it or come right under. I mean, we knew exactly what was going on, and we knew who our competitors were. And we knew the talent that we were losing, and we knew the talent that we were getting. And so forget about public information or listing it. This was on a very functional basis. We lost Joe Blow. Why? Joe Blow got $20,000 more from this other firm. So we have to figure out whether we want to compete for that or not. I guess I'm looking for a more focused type of analysis as to what it is we're trying to do, who we're trying to compete against, why are we trying to compete. I mean, why are we trying to compare ourselves to that? Because because I also know that there's another way that these comparators are used, again, in the private sector, not here. Where the CEO comes up and says, by the way, the CEO of this Fortune 100 company is making $20 million more a year than I am. I need to compete. And because otherwise, you might lose me to that company. Well, we're not going to lose you to that company because that company's got a CEO. And so, meeting that salary number maybe does a couple of things. Maybe it makes us look better in the public's eyes. Maybe it makes you, the CEO, feel better. And maybe, in fact, it does prevent you from walking. You know, but I would like to see a more functional analysis to why we're picking whomever we're picking. And I guess something more than they're the same size as we are. And quite frankly, along the lines of why you said these other companies and you didn't, these other funds that were mentioned shouldn't be in. I mean, is that sort of analysis that I kind of wasn't hearing until that question came up?
Some of them are, but again, without naming names, are simply, it's not a politic to say it, are broken. They're just.
And that's
they're
exactly
just-
I'm fine with that. So I guess I would want to start with, you know, who are the people that we're competing with for talent? Who are the people that we're losing talent to? And kind of start, you know, if we could.
Yeah, I would say
They are
that,
not
and there are
lists.
two
People are
things I'll go
competing
back to it that we attempted to show. The competitions for talent. I think Chris has done these analyses show it's very it is diverse and fragmented. So that's let's all acknowledge it is it's you can't say that it's Mr. Reyes had mentioned it's not these 10 credit unions that we can specifically point to. It's diverse and fragmented. And then the points.
And I apologize. I guess I would want to dig deeper on that and see, are we losing them because of pay? Are we losing talent?
Let Chris answer that.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't have to necessarily answer this now, but is this some, you know, because you can lose people for a lot of different reasons. And is pay the primary reason why we're losing them? In that case, they should be on the list.
Right. The two pages of analysis that we just want to highlight again are one, if we go back to this page where you see this is CIO terminations, and this is what we gathered anecdotally, so it's not every possible person. And what it underscores, again, the 2 points are that if you look at the list, Mercer, you got a consulting firm. PV Capital is basically an outsourced CIO. You look at the list; it's a fragmented list. It's diverse, but there are people who are that there's demand for these people. That's first point. And the second is that I would consider go back to monitor employee-related risk. And I think that this is something that we were able to show because it's public disclosure. And I think that the board, if I were in your shoes, this would make me nervous. Is this, which is all this is all from P&I. But I mean, we can show pay data, but if you look at this list, you see this is the top 50 paid from tax-exempt organizations from P&I. So this is all, it's based upon public filing, so it's not clean and it's not, many of these are our clients, but it's disclosed. Of the top 50, there are 2 public fund CIOs on this list. If I were a board and I wanted to have a top investment staff, and I look at the list here, this would make me nervous. This would make me wonder.
Well, let's examine that. No judgment on this. But does it make you nervous, or does it simply say, here, you know, in going back to the area that I know best, which was the law firm context, there were some firms that were outliers, and we just said we can't compete with them. And that's fine. We're gonna lose talent to them, but there's a limited number of people that we're gonna lose to them because they can't hire but so many folks, and that's fine. So we didn't consider, when we tried to figure out what our compensation was for entering law students, we didn't include them because we said we're never gonna compete with that level. So the fact, and again, it didn't make us nervous that there were other competitors of ours who were paying an immense amount of money. If there were a significant number of firms out there paying significantly more, that would make us nervous.
You know your system infinitely better than we could ever know it. We would just look at this and say that you're unique given your size and your prominence. So you're not like all those other firms. You're the largest, most complex. You have the
public.
you have an enormously complex and important job to do.
We're better than the other firms.
And you look at this list and you basically see that there are,
I guess I'm saying, I get, this goes to the point you were making before that I think you were making, that, you know, there's some outliers on there. And, you know, so I guess I go back to my question of, how are we putting this list together? And I guess what I'm hoping that we will get from you is a recommendation that's based on functionality, as opposed to, that I know you're able to do, then, rather than just comparative size. Because if there's an outlier there that is not truly a competitor, because, you know, are we really at risk of losing top talent to these organizations that we don't want to lose, and therefore we want to really compete for that?
there are clearly outliers there. So if there are clearly organizations that are outliers, but I just go back to Appendix 1 and you ask yourself, are your practices relative to top talent for an organization of this stature? Again, for this stature, are your practices outliers? I mean, there's pages and pages of people who are paid. I mean, I'm just going back to Chris's position, multiples. So what is the outlier? That's the question that I'm asking. I don't have the answer for you, but that's the question I struggle with.
Well, I guess that's, and I guess I'm looking for more meat on that bone.
And that's when we reflected, we said, okay, if we wanted to realize that there's a wide range of practices, and we tried to be as focused as possible to say, okay, we want to look at organizations that are large, that are complex, that we have a good sample of them, so we don't have biases by individual firms. That's really where we came up with that one consolidated list that you see on Appendix 4. There is no, going back to I think we skipped over that page. There is no one, unlike law firms. We say, I really need to find someone who does trust and estates practice, who's got 15 years of experience, and we have something that's clear, and there are 10 white shoe law firms that are in San Francisco, and that's our peer group. This is much more fragmented and complex, so it's not as simple to say. So in this case, we took a shot at something that we felt was reasonable and credible, with organizations that you feel like any one of those organizations say, yeah, that's a group that we feel is fine. Texas Teachers, Stanford, University of California Regents, Columbia, the Canadian systems. None of them are perfect, but as a group, they kind of paint the picture of leading institutional investors, as opposed to, South Dakota, not to pick on them again.
For now, yeah.
Rich?
So I have a couple of thoughts, I guess, on this. One is, let me sort of start generically. We're coming off a set of hard times where, I sort of look at this as risk reward for our people, right? It's like when times, in terms of the job market, when times are risky, we look better. And we've come off of risky times when lots of people in the private sector are getting laid off and shuttled aside, and things aren't going very well. We look much safer to people, and so they were willing to eschew risk and the reward that came with it. I think times are changing now, and I think the potential lure of the reward out there for our best investment people is greater now than it was 2 years ago. And we have to be kind of cognizant of that, because we've kind of held ourselves in check on that. When I look at the list of our comparators, it makes sense to me. It looks like a reasonable group for us to use as some sort of guideline. Remember, we're not bound by it in any way, shape, or form. it sort of gives us a notion of where the market might be. We're going to end up making our own decisions inside of that list, outside of that list, based on what we think is right. But it's not a bad list to look at. You know, is it perfect? No, but it doesn't really matter if it's perfect, frankly, because it's not like we're going to find the midpoint on that and that's what we're going to pay our guy, because we're going to nail it down on that. So it gives us some guidance, and frankly, what it says to me is we are, as an organization, running an unacceptably high risk of losing our really good people, because there are, in fact, opportunities out there for them to take. Now, we have a lot of things that are attractive. We have a good organization. We have a great location. We have stability. All those things help us, frankly, pay less than probably the market rate. And we'll keep that in mind as we set these things. Nonetheless, if I look at sort of the risk-reward thing, I see that creeping up on me in a way that I think should be to us unacceptable. And so I think we need some sort of an adjustment. And I think this gives us some grounds for working around for our adjustments when we get around to setting our compensations. It just makes sense to me. It's a helpful indicator. When it gets time to do this, it's actually a helpful indicator to me of where we are. I think we've been, frankly, pretty lucky. I mean, we all know where our biggest competitor is, right? We all know where we lose most of our folk. And I think we don't lose as many as we probably might otherwise, because I think we're a better place to work for lots of reasons. And hopefully the really smart people we have are recognizing that and they're staying put. But as times get better, things change. And so those are kind of my thoughts on it. It's time to do some kind of an adjustment that protects us a little better from the risks of loss of key people that's out there. And I listen, no one understands more than me how hard this is. We're a state system. These are incredibly public. It's really hard to justify. You run into all sorts of problems of shifts between people that are paid enormously high and everybody else in the organization who are probably really underpaid. Right? I have that same problem at my place. I can't compete with school districts. Right? I make less money than probably every superintendent in the district superintendent of the state of California. That's just the way the state system is. And you sort of have to live with it. Now, fortunately, I'm enthralled with the power of it all, so that so it all works out. But it's
talk to the New York Times.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but these are the kinds of. But it is, one of the things is I worry about. If I lose somebody, the ability to replace them with a really good person is so small, because we're so uncompetitive. And I worry that we're going to catch ourselves in that kind of a cycle. And for this, that risk is unacceptable to me. If we're going to really protect the pensions of the folks we're working for, that becomes an unacceptable risk to me.
Ms. Hendricks and
Can we go back to the slide, the one that is the comparator, the one that you're recommending that we compare ourselves against? I do want to say I have a high comfort level with this group. I look at this group of organizations, and I think they are people that we compete with, and they're a comparable group. I think it's so important for us to remember that we are a public fund, and I think sometimes when we compare to private sector, or I feel like that clouds our conversation sometimes, and I think we have to focus on who we are and the unique, interesting, strange beast we are as CalSTRS, and the unique eccentricities of our fund and our demographic and the members that we represent. And so I have a high comfort level with comparing us as CalSTRS with other institutional investors that I see on this list. I think Michael makes a valid point in terms of how do we discern that. I don't think it's just about size, though. I think it is about the kinds of funds that they are. I think I would be curious to hear from Chris. I think you were going to come up and then you went and sat down again about I think Michael brought up I don't know who brought up the question at this point about, how many people we lose to pay versus other reasons. And so maybe you could just comment on that. But I guess I just want to say that I am concerned, in the last couple of years, of us losing more folks to the pay issue and I think it makes sense to me to compare ourselves to a more comparable group, so. Can you comment on that, Chris?
I was going to answer it in part, and I forgot to bring my book. It's back in your CIO report if it's in, if you have it handy, your closed session CIO report. What I was going to refer to is I am trying to keep track of compensation. I'm using a legend system. So if you look at the departure report for the year, it shows a plus if the comp is a little higher, 2 pluses if it's a lot higher, equals, or 1 minus or 2 minuses. And I can go back all the way back to 2000 for you to show you whether we lost people for a little, because what we would ask them is kind of what's your starting pay and what's your incentive to track that. Up through about 06, we tended to lose people. Thanks, Michelle. So INV 193, closed session. It's a grayed out area in the top because, but I have that column for salary. So 3 pluses in that case for a significant increase in salary. I would say up till about 07, we tended to lose a lot of people because the other employers had incentive compensation capabilities. We increased ours, and I think that made us competitive. We would lose people for a lot higher pay. Now, like as I look at that list, the number 2 person, you know, if we lose a portfolio manager or a director, it is usually for much higher compensation. When we lose investment officer 1s and 2s, it is usually slightly higher compensation, but a quicker career track. They can get up to a portfolio manager faster somewhere else than they can with us. But because of the fact that, as I was mentioning to Adam, and you know I've said this a lot, we tend to recruit and try and draw people who want to live in Sacramento. I don't want the mayor to call me, but it's not, you're not going to move to Sacramento because of the nightlife. No offense. Great town.
I live in LA.
Yes, you know, culture is the West Sacramento. Culture is, you know, the Sacramento Kings and our art museum. People, but the issue is our staff, if they want to move up in the business, other than CalPERS, there's nothing else here. They're going to have to move to San Francisco, LA, or back east. And so I've tried to show you where we've tended to lose people. High net worth offices in the Bay Area are a draw, and then our peer funds. But I'll go back over time and show you that plus, double plus, triple plus to give you an idea of what kind of level of compensation we lose people to. But it is almost all of our departures, as you saw them broken out between, you know, the 2 big losses are, besides retirement, are peers or investment management firms. Obviously, investment management firms offer significantly higher compensation in the form of equity options, which we're not going to compete with. And then if we lose them to a peer fund, it is for higher compensation.
So, and I apologize, I'm going to have to leave quickly, but what I'm hearing from you is another issue, which is the difficulty of recruiting. You know, you're almost arguing for, you know, we should be above everybody else because of because of the difficulty in recruiting people generally.
Yes, but you know, as you know, we work hard at growing from within because we know that's the most cost-effective way of succession planning instead of outside recruiting. I always say our real goal is to grow up our talent from within, but then sprinkle the gene pool with some outsiders periodically. We have recruited people from other funds, obviously like Tim Works. PERS across the river, as Adam pointed out, has been able to recruit. Their last 3 hires have come from the Canadian funds. They've actually been able to pull down here the head of their infrastructure from a Canadian fund, the junior person in infrastructure from a Canadian fund. We're not close, you know, when it comes, IO 1, 2, and 3 are equal to PERS, but when you get to PM, SPM over there, their SIO is our director, my CIO, we're a full step below there. I'm paid about what their asset class directors are paid. So that, you know, they've been able to compete at that level. We would not be able to recruit out of Canada other than a junior person.
Let me throw this out. Is the prestige of our organization worth a little bit of a discount?
There are some people, PERS used to be very worried about the stepping stone, that people would come to use us just as a stepping stone to get higher. Sometimes that shows up in the interview a little bit. I often say, as long as the person's going to stay for a while, then we're going to grow them and they're going to improve and help us and then potentially use us as a stepping stone. I'm seeing that more now, I would say, at the IO2 and 3 level. The PM level is usually somebody with about 10 years experience. They're typically at that stage in the family life where they're not as mobile. And yes, Tim might be an example of he wouldn't have landed that job if he hadn't been at our visibility, but we're not having that high rate of turnover, I would say, like I've seen at PERS historically, where people came, stayed for 2 years, and then went on to a money manager, and it's pretty clear they just used them as a launching pad. We don't have that.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to say finally that, this is a very important exercise, and I think what you're saying is very important. And as was said earlier, it's not so much what the list looks like, but what we do with the list. But I would opt for a more condensed list. We still have to figure out what to do with it and how we're going to use it and how we want to position ourselves within whatever list we come up with.
Right.
I look forward to getting advice on what you think makes the best sense in terms of the listing that the comparator list that we have and why it's why one company is in, one company is out, and maybe there's some outliers in there anyway, just for comparison purposes, so we can see it. Because the issue is, how do we use it, and what's the best? How do we best position ourselves for recruitment and retention? Because those are the two things that we're trying to do.
Anything else, Mr. Barnett? Thank you. Cassandra, do you want to add and maybe give us some context in terms of
Right.
next steps here?
Certainly. Whether or not we change the comparator groups and where we position the salaries within the market would require a policy change. So that would be an amendment that the board would need to consider moving forward. What the information item suggests is that unless you want Adam to provide a different comparator group, we could have the data pulled from this this proposed comparator group and the other comparator group that we currently are using, and conduct some analysis from there and decide.
Repeat that again. You could use the current comparative group that we have.
And pull the data for evaluation, and then pull the data from this proposed comparator group, and evaluate where the salaries would lie in the different quartiles. And at that point, if you wanted to make a change or if you wanted to modify it, we could discuss that. But we could look at where you would want, if you want to make a change from the current comparator group to this one or an alternative one, and where you would want to position that, the salary ranges in the comparator groups.
So,
And leave the policy issue for a later time. That, I think, is what she's saying, that you're just going to explore data, but the actual conclusion, which would require board policy change and a vote of the board, would be for a different time. Is that
Right.
what you're saying? Yeah.
Dana, Ms. Dillon?
Cassandra, not that we have to have a target date, but if we were to have a target date, to have this implemented, it would be for the 13-14 fiscal year, 14-15. What are we trying, if we were to change?
Well, it would be best for the
13-14.
the 13-14 years,
And-
because
And
salaries are adjusted on the fiscal year.
And to implement that, then we would have to have our policy changed by July?
June would be
June
preferable, yeah.
Thank you.
And the policy change would be for the entire board, not just this committee.
Right.
Really what we're looking at now is, what kind of direction we want to give McLaughlin relative to the comparative group. Come back with the data and what the salary ranges could be, depending upon where we would want to rank. And you could bring back the current comparative group or the suggested comparative group that's here, or amended the suggested comparative group. So is there,
At some point, you have three decisions at some point, not today necessarily. One is the composition of the comparator group, which is a policy decision. The second decision then is the placement in the comparator group for setting the salaries, like X percentile, that's in your policy. And then the third decision potentially would be transition rules if we needed them, if salary ranges were taken out of current overlapping ranges. So it'd be those three things at a later point you would have to decide once you decide what the right approach is. Right, is that right?
Right.
Right. Mr. Chair, I'm a little bit confused. This is an information item, and yet we're being asked to basically lay out what we would like them to do and how to proceed. And, you know, if there's 5 of us who vote, but it's really not subject to vote at this point. If we were to go and say, go and do the, you know, the top quartile, and some of us would say, well, no, we like the 67-33 break. There's really no direction for them that we can say you have consensus, and I hate for him to go and do 3 or 4 different models because it just adds to our cost. So I'm a little bit confused as to what the committee's request is, or the consultant's request is, since it's an informational item.
Well, if I can help a little bit, it would in fact be somewhat what you said, which is we're just like any, wouldn't have to be talking about compensation, anything we talk about here, we're trying to get the right data for you so you make a good decision. And I think it's probably a stretch to converge on one data approach. So Cassandra was suggesting the current method and alternative 3, but it isn't, and Adam can respond to cost, but pursuing 2 or 3 strategies here doesn't change our costs in any dramatic way. So we were trying to get at least the best buckets for you to think about today, and without, because I can tell you don't want to make a decision till you actually get some real data and see what numbers look like.
But, you know,
We need to tell them what data we want.
exactly, and then the question is, do we have consensus from the 5 voting members in terms of what data? And I certainly welcome input from the other members as well, because this is, even though there's only 5 voting, I certainly want to make sure that makes sense, because I don't think this goes up for the full board. This stays here and this is decided.
Policy change.
Until we get to the policy.
Until ready for the policy, yeah.
But hopefully there's maybe not perfect consensus, but relative consensus on 2 or 3 approaches, and we would then research them for you.
I guess the way I see it, Mr. Reyes, is just asking for additional information and see what the comparative groups, what they would actually result in.
Yeah.
And not changing any policy, not doing anything other than, okay, what are the implications of status quo
versus all the other
Number
models.
one,
Right.
which was the
So
first.
that's what I see it
Okay.
as.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, you know, this is,
They're all on the same
yeah, thank you.
Is that in
That
your
makes
comfort
sense.
range?
Yeah, that's within my comfort range, thank you, sir.
Okay. I'm glad you asked that for clarification. Does that make sense to other people that are on the committee? What we're actually we would be asking for is just additional information and data so that we know what the implications could be should we make any adjustments. Mr. Boykin?
Or were you about to speak?
Correct.
Well, that's,
And
why
if
don't
I-
we finish talking and then come back
Okay,
to
I was
the-
just gonna throw one additional one into the mix, and that would be alternative 3, but with a overweighting, and I don't know how to do that, but with some sort of overweight to public funds.
You could add to that point, but the simplest, the KISS approach, we could just
Add more public
add
funds.
a few
Add more
more,
public.
that there are a few more that either the board or staff. More like that. Like simple.
You can go up.
Yeah,
like
just
that,
to
but-
finish.
Hold on a second, Pedro. Grant, were you done?
Well, I had one more thing, but it pays following.
Hold on.
We're giving you a run for your money.
Go
today,
ahead,
Harry.
Pedro.
To be perfectly honest, I'm not very familiar with many of the other boards that are out there. So as a consultant, I would hope that you have more advice for us in terms of what's out there. I don't sit in CalSTRS. I've gone to two, the Institutional Investors Conference, and that's the extent of my knowledge. I do more of my own analytical and review and read and, ask questions, so I couldn't tell you other than the list here, but by tomorrow I won't remember any of this.
You want to leave it open as a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Sharon?
Well, did you?
Grant.
I'm sorry, I'll let those guys.
Grant.
Just remember.
Just wanted to go back and clarify, Jack, a couple members have said it doesn't matter if we have a comparator group, we can still set the salaries, regardless. But I think the way our policy works, we really, once we set the comparator group, we do say, we don't set that aside. We use that to figure out, do we want to target the median, the lower, the upper? And that really does, we can't say that this is a document separate from what we actually end up with.
No, that's the sequence.
Right.
Comparator group, collect the data, determine what percentile, pay transition
But
rules.
it's not just an informational tool that we,
It's
because
gonna
I
be our
heard.
guideline.
So you'd reach a
Couple-
conclusion,
Right, okay.
whenever that is. Yes. Then we would work on the policy part with you, yeah.
Mrs. Iger?
Could I get that clarified again?
Am I? Did
I mean, we are not,
I thought I.
Hold on a second, Rich.
sorry.
Oh, I thought.
Rich, hold on.
I gave away my speaking time and I didn't get it back.
Go ahead.
That's okay. Should I
Ms.
do
Hendrick,
it?
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go
So can I just clarify though, because it's at the end of the day and so we're asking for what information and data are we asking for from number 1 and number 3? What specific, and I don't know if I'm probably not asking you, Adam, I guess I'm asking us as the board, what information and data do we want Mr. Barnett to provide for us that will help in our next conversation?
Sandra can answer.
Well, I think that we're going to get the current comparator group data, the data for the leading institutional investors up here, and then another alternative that Grant recommended to overweight the public, but I'm not sure if there was a decision to just add more public funds to account for that or overweight it as it stands. So maybe you could clarify.
Yeah, I mean, I think just adding more, you're right.
That'll give it more weight.
Sharon, is it?
Done?
Rich, you want to weigh back?
I just want to make
You want to buzz in?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Here you go. I just want to go back and clarify this point. Certainly what we find out by using the comparator group informs our decision, but it does not limit it, right? We are not obliged in any way, shape, or form to be inside that group or any place around that group when we make an actual decision about what compensation is going to be. Certainly, we've got it there because we want the advice from it, right? When we want to look at it. But if for some reason, and I don't know what it would be, one way or another, we decide that we're going to be below that group completely or above that group completely, we would be free to do that.
No, I think it should be to
Well,
Cassandra.
We want to be able to use a comparator group that we're actually going to use for benchmarking salaries. So if, I think that if, so if we're not going to, if we're going to pull the group and then disregard the data, then we're not really using the comparator group. I think that when we are looking at the three different salary buckets that we're going to get from these different comparator groups, it'll give you an idea of whether or not you're going to want to make some adjustments in the salaries. And
I understand,
but you can set them at the low, you're going to want to set them either in the low range, mid range, or high range of whatever comparator group you've decided.
we won't know the answer to that until we see what's there.
That's-
And the truth of the matter is, if for some reason, there are lots of reasons why, having got the comparator group and having looked at the salaries, we may balk. Probably because we think they're too high, but conceivably because we think they're too low. So, in which case, we may, when we get to the point of actually setting salaries, we may balk at that, and the answer is, okay, now we need to have you go back and find another comparator group to somehow bolster the case we've made. Because, or we change the target.
Right now, we're at 50th percentile. You might look at this group and say, we're at 25th percentile.
Right,
of
because
this group.
there are lots of reasons that come into play that alas, given our setting, have nothing to do with comparative salaries that are out there. And I just want to make clear that those, at the end of the day, those are often commanding for us in a way that the logic of the comparator group is not. And I know it shouldn't be that way, but it is.
My understanding, and I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm surprised by the answer though, because my understanding is the comparative group provides us with the bookmarks. So if right now, I'm just purpose of the argument, if right now we're paying $100 and the comparative group says 120 to 350, in our policies, we're saying we're gonna be somewhere between those new numbers. We're not gonna stay at $100. Isn't that, I
Well, we
mean,
would have to adjust the policy. The policy says where we're gonna target that. So that's that would be one of the decisions that we would have to make.
but
Is
the
it-
target's gonna be within the comparative groups, whether we're at the 50th or 25th, but it's going to be with this bookmarks. We're not gonna stay at 100 if the numbers come in at 120 to 350.
That's correct.
So,
Yeah.
so the information we get does in fact push us to something. Where we are from there is,
I thoroughly expected to.
okay, all
I
right.
mean, it will provide us with guidance, but it doesn't, it's not like even if we set a target, we want to be the 25th percentile. We are not obliged to be at the 25th percentile, no matter what it says,
It's true, but
right? And I just, if we find consistently that what we've set isn't working for us, we'll change what we've set.
Yes,
It's
that's
the-
true. We
it's the
changed the
real answer to
policy.
that.
We changed
But
the policy.
I'm assuming we're gonna be there. I actually think this is where, taking a look at this,
Okay.
it makes sense. It's pretty much where we ought to be, and it will help. It will help with our decision making.
I'll be quick, I don't wanna belabor this, but
Come on.
I think, come on, but I'm,
going to grant.
but I'm
This is
going
a
to.
45-minute item.
sleeping bags and
But I think that as a practical matter, we would never take the time to design it and then set it aside. And I think we all know that would be really bewildering to staff if we,
And I hope not to.
right.
Right? I hope not to.
On a simple,
Yes.
on a simple, practical, and very commercial, very tactical basis, what this would do is it would, okay, if this is the group, this Appendix 4, this would say, this is what the world pays. It would provide information for you to understand what are the bids out there. What are the bookmarks? And then what are the bookmarks from our current group? And then at that point, you'll be in a better, potentially in a better position to decide, something, as Jack had mentioned, maybe the 25th percentile. We're still in the bookmark, we're at the lower end on the shelf, but we're still in the shelf. That's a comfortable place for us to be, but at least then you would know. Right now, without either the current group or the other group, we simply don't know.
Give us our
Any-
bookends, please.
Coming, so in April, Cassandra, would you summarize what we will be expecting to come back for us, please?
So in April, Adam will be coming back with 3 sets of data, one with our current comparator group, one with the comparator group that's in Appendix 4, and an alternative comparator group with additional public funds included in it to accommodate the higher weighting to the public funds. At that point, we will be deciding whether or not we want to change to one of those comparator groups or stay with the one that we have. If we change where we want to position salaries within the comparator group, and transition rules for moving into different salary ranges if that is deemed necessary with the data.
Mr. Side, one quick question. Are we going to go inside that comparison a little farther up and down inside the salary? I mean, we sort of focused on CIO salaries.
Oh,
Are we
that's-
gonna-
we're gonna
are
get
we
the-
gonna go through the?
Yeah, we're gonna
the
get the
range?
full set, that's the whole point,
Great.
yeah. Good question.
Ms. Hendricks?
I totally spaced on what I was. So what I was going to ask is, what you were, I can't see, Cassandra, with
other
the,
way
caption, sorry, Mr. Barnett. Is that something that the compensation committee will actually, is that going to be an action item at that point, and that we vote on that? Or what's the procedure from that point in April?
Yeah, I think that I think that we'll be having it'll be a decision item at that point. And in June, what I would expect would be to come back with the actual amended policy language. If
Should we make a decision to make any changes
yeah,
at
if
all?
you make any changes in April, then we can make the policy amendments in June and have it be effective in July. That would be ideal. So.
Anything else?
Good.
Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Barnett, thank you, Cassandra. Item 4 is the HR executive report. Do you have a report for us?
No, I don't have anything else.
Number 5,
That was
any information requests? Okay, number 6 is the draft agenda. Just review that. Okay,
So the, on the draft agenda, we will I will be
Right.
making the change that we will be analyzing the data that McLaughlin is bringing forward, so.
in item 3, would or would not be there?
Item 3 would move into June, because it would be adopting the
Correct.
policy changes,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
I would just say, we're gonna adjust the time there, 45 minutes. 4.5 hours. No, it was a good discussion and good input, and I think we got clarity as to, you know, what the next steps are and what we are doing and what we're not doing at this point. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for your input. Opportunities for statement from the public. Anyone from the public would like to speak? Seeing none, we're adjourned.
Board will start at 4:30.